Is that the digital term? Hello everybody, welcome to the Public Accountability meeting for March. We've got digital as the thematic today, which we'll come on to in due course in the agenda. We'll start with attendance and apologies. We've got apologies from Assistant Chief Constable Oliver. Julia can't be with us today, the Police and Crime Commissioner, she's on the way down to London. But I think that's all. Rob Bowles from the Federation is due to be here, so we may wander in at any moment, but if not, we'll register Rob's apologies. But we'll go around and introduce yourselves, please. I'm Will Naylor, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Tom Thorpe, I'm the Commissioner's Policy and Scrutiny Manager.
Good afternoon, Fraser Sampson, Interim CEO.
Superintendent Mike Walker, Operational Technology Lead.
Rich Jones, Chief Digital Information Officer.
Maria Reynolds, Head of Organisation and Development.
John Manfall, Unison Branch Secretary.
Hello, Lisa Winwood, I'm the Deputy Chief Constable.
Dave Jones, Chief Constable.
Phil Kane, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable.
Claire Craven Griffiths, Chief Constable's Chief of Staff.
And Rob from the Police Federation, if he comes. Thank you everyone for coming. Draft minutes, they don't normally take very long because they're all linked to YouTube effectively, but has anyone got any comments on the minutes from the last meeting on page 1? Page 2? No, great. And the actions thankfully don't take very long either because there's only one, which isn't due to come back for a short while yet, so we can carry that over to the next meeting, well, a couple after that actually. So that's those two items done. Sam, are there any questions from the public? No, not in advance. Okay, that means we can crack straight on. We've saved 50 minutes already. On to you, Richard, on digital, please.
Thank you very much, thank you. Right, I shall get my machine working. So, I've got about 10 slides.
Yep.
I will go through them at a reasonable pace. I expect to be stopped and ask questions, so I'm ready for those. Okay, so I'm going to this afternoon talk you through a couple of aspects of our current state, how we do digital, how big digital is here at NYP, a bit on data security, information governance, and just a touch on GDPR.
I'm going to stop you. That didn't take very long, did it? I'm just, for the public,
yes.
Things like acronyms, so GDPR, might be lost in them, digital dimensions might be lost. There are various things in this quite technical world.
Okay.
That might be difficult to understand, so we can try and keep it as simple as possible.
Okay. So GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulations. I think I've got that correct. The new EU law coming into effect in May of this year. We'll talk about how digital enables the police crime plan, a bit of a project overview, a pick into a couple of our key digital projects, and then something about our key themes for strategy and a bit of a thing on digital transformation, which is the next big thing here. At NYP, Digital Information Services Group, the name that we give to the ICT function, is about 75 staff and services about 3,200 service users. Those are office and staff and volunteers, etc. We run about 50 locations across the county, and those 3,200 service users use about 9,000 end-user devices. So an end-user device is anything, a laptop, a mobile phone, a tablet.
And is that about normal? So that's 3 per person?
It's a little higher than it should be, I think. And that reflects the fact that we are on a journey. We're rolling kit out, more of which later. And we probably haven't done a consolidation piece that will recover assets that we get back to more normal.
The ratio might come down.
I would expect it to, yeah, along with the overall cost per service user. So on a value for money, we know that there is an opportunity to look at our costs. So we maintain quality while spending less, and that's certainly something that we are looking to do within our strategic activity. We run about 200 what I've called data-bearing business applications. So these are systems that contain information, and a lot of data. 200 terabytes is a goodly amount of data. To put it in context, in the private sector, in a large life insurance company, not so many years ago, the whole life insurance company was about half of that. Okay, so we do have a lot of data, and a large number of servers, 500 servers. So those are the bits of hardware that run the applications, contain the databases, and they are in 2, and I won't name them, server rooms, and they're configured to be highly resilient. Because as we know, a key system going down at the wrong time, and there isn't a good time because policing is 24/7 business, is something we've designed out. The vast majority of my team, the 75, are consumed with supporting, operating, maintaining, but we also run, at any one point in time, circa 50 small, medium and large projects, which is a struggle for us, and I'll touch upon that a little later. And then in terms of the spend, in round numbers, we spend about £12 million on running IT, which is about 8.5% of our total revenue, last year's revenue.
Before I ask you, Richard, what sort of value for money that represents, that's the current state. I know you've only been here a year, which might be worth a year or so.
Yes.
Might be worth the public remembering just in terms of this presentation. But we're talking about the current state. That obviously we've had the last 5 or 6 years of, investing in the foundation effectively and infrastructure. Yes. Can you give the public a sense of the sort of steps we've taken in the last few years, albeit you haven't been here to sort of...
Yes, so I understand that Julia and Dave were the driving forces behind significant investment in building a solid infrastructure platform, and the servers we talk about there and the resilience and so on and so forth are a key product of that. Excuse me. And there are records on the Commissioner's website about that if people care to look. We're now in a position where we're leveraging that investment by running some innovative applications on top, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But really that's provided a foundation. I think everybody understands that the modern way of delivering infrastructure is you tend not to build your own these days, you tend to pay somebody to run it for you, the so-called cloud. And I anticipate that in the next refresh cycle we won't be spending nearly as much capital, we'll be much more cloud-based.
We'll come on to those types of issues later.
Yes.
Fraser.
Thank you, Rich. Just again, in terms of putting this into context then, so you've got 200 data-bearing business applications, 500 servers, those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
Within a policing environment, how does that look in terms of other police services?
So there's a body called the National Police Technology Council, of which I'm a member, and all 43 forces have their IT leads come together quarterly. And we discuss a range of things. What there isn't is a benchmark yet for cost, for quantity and quality. Okay, they're much more focused around the national programmes, and I'll talk a bit more about those later. My gut sense is we're kind of typical in the sense that most police forces have a similar number of broadly comparable applications, and that's what drives the number of servers and the amount of storage and so on and so forth. So I think in quantity of stuff we're typical, in the cost of that stuff we're a little bit more expensive than I think we should be.
And on that national context, again, I think I'm right in saying there are more than a couple, but some national databases that all police forces share,
Yeah.
but most of this information is held locally, so each force has its own set of data and databases that it uses to...
command and control, records management, geographic information systems, we have them of our own.
Often the public, 43 forces share the same big database that everyone jumps in and out of.
So it's mixed. So if we take the Police National Computer, Police National Database, that's being replaced by a thing called the National Law Enforcement Data Platform. And that's where information about people and about vehicles, etc., are stored and shared. But when we take a call from a member of the public here, that typically goes into our local databases, but then we do consume that data so that we can understand about the people involved. We'll talk about Operation Mobile Working in a moment and how that works.
My last question on this slide is roughly what those 75 staff do. So are they, for the public's sort of understanding, are they people fixing computers? Are they writing software? What are they doing? No,
so the support, operate, maintain in the last bullet point is the answer there. So we support users, we operate the environment, and we maintain the systems. Okay, and because we've got 200 systems and 500 servers and 9,000 endpoints, that's why we need that number of people. I'll talk a little bit later about because we have done a lot in the last 12 months. I didn't start it, but I was here for the finishing that stuff. The volume of things we've done has meant that the quality of our what I call our user experience, so the reliability of the kit, that kind of stuff is not quite where it needs to be. But when we address those, as we are working to, then the amount of effort to support users will diminish as a consequence.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so current state, today, what are we good at, what are we not so good at? We're pretty good at providing reliable infrastructure, securing data and protecting information, supporting reactive policing operations and helping users in a crisis. We're pretty good at that. When something happens, we respond very well. We need to get better at creating strategy that's aligned and explaining that. We need to get better at prioritising and focusing on the most important, most valuable changes. We tend to try and do too much, I think. And of course that was reflected in a recent HMIC report, not the most recent one, but I think the 1-1, I forget what date it was. So the way we manage information risks, I think, we protect that sometimes gets in the way of sharing. We have a duty to share information with other public service organisations where it improves the service we provide, and I think sometimes we tend to worry, or tend to think about the risks, not the opportunities of information sharing, I think. Agility and innovation, so just being a bit fleeter of foot and doing things in a bit smarter way. I refer to the digital user experience, so that's a bit about, how long does it take my laptop to boot up? Can I always get a connection to the Wi-Fi? Those are things that are not quite where they need to be today. Supplier and contract management. We tend to let contracts through regional procurement through appropriate, and then we don't actively manage them in the same way that we might. Value for money from digital expenditure. So we talked about previously our VMFs, our value for monies aren't quite where I think they should be. And I've put last there the strength of the market offer. We have struggled. We've had some success in recruiting good people to work in the IT team.
Is that a policing issue, a public sector issue, a North Yorkshire Police issue?
I think it's a conflation of all three. I think the public sector isn't necessarily the sexiest place. Policing is a bit niche. I've been here a year and I genuinely love coming to work every day because it's a really interesting organisation and we do good stuff, but I think you have to have learned that. You wouldn't know that unless you were here. And I think regionally, North Yorkshire, rural North Yorkshire particularly, isn't a hotbed of digital skills. Leeds and up north, up in Teesside are kind of where the most, and over to Hull, so Northallerton, we tend to get a lot of staff from north of here, people who drive down the A19 or come on the train every day. Any questions?
Well, I suppose the obvious thing to say is the list on the left seems a lot shorter than the list on the right. Is part of the next few years to rebalance that list.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, if you understand your strengths and weaknesses, then you can leverage your strengths and you can address your weaknesses. So absolutely, beyond the goods and services my team provide, our capability and its processes need to address those things. But also, I think we are embedded within an organisation that recognises some of these challenges for itself. Needing to do so much at the same time. It's not something that I respond to that rather than create that demand. So I know we're doing some work on that around the change board and some new governance arrangements, which should be helpful there. And
at the same time, whilst you've got all this in a sort of North Yorkshire sense, there's a lot of national change coming on digital policing generally, whether that's criminal justice or reporting online or all sorts of other ways of policing.
So there is a programme of 15 major, so there's a portfolio of 15 major programmes. And some of them are in the press every day or most days and some of them aren't. So if you take the Emergency Services Communication Network, ESN, the replacement of that, that's well publicised. We are waiting for it. We are increasingly anxious about its delivery because our digital radios, so we'd have digital radios but they're quite old. You can't buy them anymore. The batteries are.
Which is basically the way the police communicate with each other. So
yes.
On an operational thing.
Yes. Although that will change, and we'll talk about OMW, Operation Mobile Working, in just a moment. So yeah, that's the one that's in the press, but I talked about the National Law Enforcement Data Programme earlier. That is a changing of the computing platform for the same databases, and that's big as a project, but its impact on us is less, but we still need to be ready at the right time to receive it, to train people, to make sure our systems connect to it, that kind of stuff. A year ago, it felt as though these things were imminent. Now, some of them are a bit more imminent, but not everything's landed as we were expecting, because the Home Office and others have had major challenges with some of these programs. So we remain ever ready for some of these things.
But we are ready.
We are getting ready, I think, would be the right thing. Yes, I think, you know, when we've got lots of things to do, keeping the lights on, dealing with the local stuff, getting ready for the national stuff, it is a challenge at times. Okay. So there's lots of words on here. So the key point is that, as I see it in my words, you know, policing is a people powered by information service. And therefore, you know, we create and we consume lots of information, and rightly so. We focus on its security, we protect its confidentiality, its integrity, and its availability. We are compelled to be and are accredited by the Home Office and the Cabinet Office, such that we can connect to the national network and consume all of the national systems. And we spend and continue to spend a fair amount of time and money on that, and that's important to us. So that's the health check. We do occasionally, as every business does, have minor data breaches where somebody's read some information they shouldn't have. There is an FOI published on that, so if people wanted to see the details, I don't think it's appropriate for me to expand on that, given that there was an FOI and we've responded formally to that. And we do have appropriate governance arrangements. Lisa is the senior information risk owner, and she runs.
What does that mean?
I think she holds.
Maybe Lisa can answer.
Sorry. Yes. Good question.
So, under the Data Protection Act and under the new GDPR, we have a responsibility as an organisation to ensure that our governance around information management, the security, some of the risks that Richard is talking about there in terms of how we manage that data and we protect it and how we comply with the data standards for public sector organisations have to be monitored and managed as an organisation. So an individual, and in some forces it's an assistant chief officer, in other forces it's the deputy chief constable, undertakes that role and then is provided with training and ensures that information asset owners and the structures and processes in the organisation are there to ensure the security of people's data is maintained, and also has responsibility for when we do have a data breach, that we investigate fully how that data breach occurred, that we, in those instances where it has to be reported to the Information Commissioner's office, that we do so, that we complete the relevant paperwork in respect of those breaches so that we learn the lessons and we can put in place any remedy to how that data breach occurred. Interestingly, the majority of data breaches don't occur as a result of our technology. They occur as a result of individuals. So, for example, people sending material to the wrong address, that can happen electronically by email, so generally it's human error. So we also run a whole programme around training individuals on the Data Protection Act to ensure that they understand what is personal data, how should we secure it. A lot of people don't understand that we all handle personal data because we do it on such a regular basis, and the care that needs to be taken in respect of that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So the next slide is rather grandly entitled Digital Enablement of the Police and Crime Plan 1721. So I've referred to policing being a people powered information service. So the 10 enabling activities, these are currently being drafted. They have not been kind of codified and accepted in a formal way as yet, but I wanted to share with the public kind of where our head was, if you will, around some of this stuff. So it's about working with and through partners, seamless integration of our systems, our information, such that if we need to give somebody some information so they can serve the public better, or if we need to receive, then we can do that much more simply.
So, and this is beginning to the realms of a sort of information management as a side to digital per se.
Yes.
But how do we square that circle of needing to protect personal information but share it for often that person's good? And often, when some of these serious cases, come to the press or whatever, it's often that information sharing that's resulted in someone or something bad happening. And obviously that's a difficult balance.
So basically there's an obligation on us through what's known as management of police information to make sure that what information we do retain is relevant and actually is linked to a policing purpose. That policing purpose could be the protection of people either from bad people or from themselves, or we have information sharing agreements or protocols with a whole plethora of different organisations. So in the child safeguarding world, for example, virtually everything we have related to a child we will put on the table with our colleagues from social services or health or education, obviously on the sole purpose of protecting that child. And then from that bit all the way through to information sharing protocols with other police forces, fire and rescue, other partners. The basic premise should be that it is for a policing purpose, and that's why you get issues if people internally look up what their neighbours are doing. That isn't for a policing purpose. The other bit for us is obviously we do work with other agencies, be it trading standards, security services, whoever, depending on the nature of the information and the classification of it. Different people at different stages can handle that kind of information, and obviously the further up you go on what we describe as a security classification, the more security will be around it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my...
Yeah, and GDPR...
Is that about right? There you go.
And GDPR codifies that a bit more sort of, a bit more structured, a bit more detail around what should happen when, and a bit more openness about what one does with
well, there's two simple limbs to the new data protection regime. The one is the general data protection regulations, which we've got until the end of May to comply with, and there's a lot of work being done around that, and that applies pan-Europe. It's not affected by any issues of Brexit, and we've had 2 years to get that in place, and that applies to virtually certainly all large organisations. The second limb is the new data protection legislation for England and Wales, which is currently on its way through Parliament, and when that gets royal assent, that will replace the previous Data Protection Act that Lisa referred to earlier, and that specifically incorporates the policing directive, which also came from the Council of Europe. So, and that makes very detailed provision for the particular challenges that are faced by a policing organisation, whether it's dealing with everything from covert surveillance activity to, as Dave said, sharing of very, very sensitive personal information about very vulnerable people with other agencies. But because of that policing purpose, it's a very different world from the generic ways in which people, particularly public authorities, need to respect and treat the data of systems.
So the reason I call that out is we do it today, but increasingly we'll have to do it much more slickly, if that's a word, and in an automated sense. So the means by which we share often requires somebody to do something, extract and whatever. In the future, in not so many years from now, systems will talk to systems much more routinely and in near real time. Will that legitimate information exchange occur? It will make us more efficient, so we have to have people do that, and actually people will get the data more quickly, whether we receive it or we give it. So this talks about accelerating that as a theme. Number two is about a fully mobile workforce, and I put in there specifically about NYP working from third-party locations.
Yes.
At the moment, there are some procedural challenges there in terms of the third party working, either third parties working with us or us in third party locations, and it's all about the protecting the personal sensitive information. Could somebody look over somebody's shoulder? Those are the practical considerations there.
And we come on to that in a bit more detail later anyway.
Yes, yeah. And then number three, people equipped with the required information wherever they are. And of course this is another facet of the same polygon in terms of geographically or organisationally. It's all about making sure that the officer or the partner really has that information to deliver the right service when it's needed, not making poor decisions or decisions informed by less than perfect information, which is maybe where they are today. A high quality insight into organisational service performance. So NYP started last year a business insight programme with a view of bringing all of the data that we have into a place and a format where people can really understand the performance and the cost of performance and the risks. That project was started, and in fact only this morning we talked about how do we accelerate that going forward. It's such an important thing for us. A lean organisation. So lean refers to a process design methodology that removes waste out of a process, and waste can be double handling, it can be waiting, it can be transport. And so a business process management capability will define, in the future I think, define the policing and other processes, the back office processes or the criminal justice processes, and will guide people through a consistent execution of a process, and where possible automate some of the activities, including things like information exchange. So a person won't have to wait for an email to come in from a partner to pick out the spreadsheet to do something. The business process will just present the information when the person needs it.
I'm conscious you haven't got to the end yet, Richard, but how much of this is a sort of bold vision? How much is it others are doing this and actually we're sort of catching up rather than sort of stepping ahead, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I think, I explained earlier that we're on a journey of building a solid infrastructure foundation. We've backed a couple of really smart strategic courses, Operation Mobile Working being one of them, talking at the moment. I think that with the exception of process management, others are already on this and maybe slightly ahead of us. We had a visit to the Metropolitan Police Service a little over 2 weeks ago, didn't we? Perhaps 2 weeks ago today, 3 weeks ago today. Myself and Fraser and Lisa and Julia visited them, and we talked with the Deputy Commissioner down there about this, and he recognised that actually that's something that the Met currently struggle with. The Met are very good in lots of areas, but actually this fundamental about how do you make it less person-centric and more process-centric, and how do you do that? I forget his precise words, but he had slightly different words, but he recognised the Met had this problem too. So as one data point, we could be seen as being in the thinking slightly advanced there.
Can I ask just a follow-up question to that? If we're maybe ahead in some areas but slightly behind in others, how much of this is also in process now? And given what you said about the team that we have, is this also things that we will need to look outside in order to get done, or is it, do we have capability to get this done now?
So it's a mixed bag in terms of what's in flight versus what's in plan. So the fully mobile NYP workforce is definitely in flight and well advanced. The business process management and the information automation exchange is in our heads, and we need to make the business case for it and go through the whole kind of solution design, build and implement. So that's that piece there. In terms of our capability to deliver it, our capacity at the moment is almost entirely consumed with supporting, operating, maintaining the current environment. And therefore the number that I use, and I'm not sure it's precisely accurate to a decimal place or two, but we've got about 5% of our 72 people who on any given day would be not busy supporting, operating, maintaining. And that's our challenge. So when we have a great idea, and we think it's a good idea, then we have to make sure that we include the resources of time and money to be able to either buy in as a service those things, or indeed augment our organisation capacity to deliver change. The thing about ICT and digital is, even in a highly streamlined where you've only got a small number of different systems, and policing will never be like that because of the breadth of what it does, there's a huge range of technical expertise in there. From project management versus engineering, and even in engineering you've got software engineers versus hardware engineers, and then some will be Microsoft hardware engineers, and so this is why I think the cloud, where somebody does all of that for you in terms of building that platform at the next level, is so attractive to us, because then what we can do is have capability that is focused on change and delivering that rather than on maintaining the existing.
This is just rehashing what you've just said, I guess, but if we've got 75 people keeping the lights on at the moment, and then we've got these 10 things you want to do, keeping the lights on, how far does that go? But part of the solution is they are maintained by the people who are providing the service. So the cloud, for example, let's say Microsoft keep the lights on the cloud rather than us having to spend time doing that. So the cloud's an interesting, it's a word that many people, if not most people, will have heard of by now. But broadly speaking, it's where somebody does for you all the things you currently. So we're what I call a type 1 environment. We buy the kit, we own it, we put it in our data centres, so we lock it in a room where we look after it. And of course cloud, we don't know where the kit is, except that subject to EU safe harbouring and all that kind of stuff. It has to be in the EU. And all of that time and cost and risk somebody else takes care of.
Also, cloud is often, or was historically, seen as being a less secure option. My view is quite the contrary. People like Microsoft have spent hundreds of millions of pounds on their trustworthy computing initiative, TCI as they call it. And they have spent money that we just simply don't have access to make sure that all of the technical controls are in place. We are secure. They are hyper secure because that's the way they built it. So I think security is, it used to be a concern. It doesn't concern me at all at the moment. In fact, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
It's fair to say we've obviously made decisions previously in the last couple of years around what we do with our server rooms and looking at cloud. And when we made those decisions, those cloud opportunities weren't available at that time. So
no.
how quickly has that progressed, and are we in a position, or will we be in a position, to move to some form of cloud processing storage?
Yes. So the answer is, due to the work sponsored by the Home Office and NPCC and APCC, some of those national programmes we've talked about have effectively solved the problem once for 43 forces. So if you wanted to buy an Amazon Web Service, then now we can, because somebody else has gone through all of that design analysis and that security controls, and they're now implemented. So otherwise we would have to do all of that ourselves.
So police forces en masse effectively can start. There's more options open to all sorts of police forces to do.
Yeah, those barriers to change, I think, have been levelled through the work of the national programmes. There's one in particular called the National Enabling Programme, and what it will do is it provide for all forces the ability to use the Microsoft Office 365, and many people might use that already. If you've got a free account from Microsoft, then you're using that already. So in effect, certainly for people who process less sensitive information like me versus, say, Mike, who will have serious organised crime type data in your emails potentially, then we could move them quite quickly. And then to your point, Mike, my view is that having spent a lot of money on the on-premise, we would not do it again. You know, we would by the end of this useful life, as a direction of travel, not have to refresh it on an as-is basis. So that creates a challenge of perhaps 3 years for us to be completely cloud.
Is it fair to say there's a cultural issue there, because not policing necessarily, the public sector likes to own buildings by and large and own stuff.
Yes.
Because it can then sell it and reinvest on those kinds of things. Is there a shift then generally that we need to all accept about, certainly in digital to start with, that we may sort of like lease, I don't know if that's the right word, but borrow space, lease space, buy space?
Yeah, I mean the analogy is personal contract hire versus a loan to buy a car, and that's an emotional decision. I think we will deal with it logically, but we have the luxury of some capital in addition to some revenue. And if we don't not turn the capital into revenue, but if we don't adjust the revenue or make it become revenue biased, then it'll be a struggle for us to pay for it. And that's a conversation we'd have with Dave's Chief Finance Officer and Michael Porter in PCC about how do we consume less capital but more revenue, because that's how it's paid for.
If you move obviously from a capital model to a revenue model, you do exactly what you do with the personal contract plan for a vehicle, don't you?
Yeah.
And they tell you at the end of the term you don't own anything.
Yes.
But you become then very sensitive to any price changes in the revenue model because you haven't got your own.
Yes.
So all of that has to be thought through and advised upon.
You become reliant on a
you create a dependency.
Yeah.
You do, and today in 2018 there are half a dozen global cloud providers and perhaps several hundreds of UK-based ones. And the trick is to not get locked into one of those. So you've got to maintain, I think, a degree of separation from the way they do it and what your needs, so that you can move workloads. In fact, if I think about it just now, we would probably spread our ICT services across multiple cloud providers, for reasons of commercial resilience and also technical resilience as well. So we might do some with Microsoft, some with Google, some with Amazon, some with Facebook perhaps. I don't know.
Sorry, Richard.
Yes, go ahead.
If we did that, if we went down an avenue and used a provider, if in 3 years' time the prices did change,
Yes.
would we then be at risk of having our data stored in a particular way in a particular place? would it be easily transferable to another provider if they were offering us a better deal, or
Okay.
how would
without
that,
getting
how would,
too
especially in
technical.
terms of data security?
Yeah.
And
If you lost
reassuring the
confidence in
public
a
about-
supplier, could you change to a better supplier? So I think there are two things that we would subscribe to. So you don't buy, you subscribe, you pay a monthly fee. There's the software as a service, which is where effectively you're buying the system and everything that it runs on. And then there is what they call infrastructure or platform as a service. Now we would have some of that. So Office 365 is software as a service. You're buying the online word processor. Platform as a service means that you're buying a Windows server, much like you would deploy yourself, then you put your application onto it. So in the software as a service, it can be more difficult to move because you've bought the whole thing. Platform as a service, then you make sure that the platform the provider you choose supports alongside others the particular flavour of thing. We are today, by dint of investment made previously, we run what is called a highly virtual infrastructure. So in the old days, if you wanted a server, you'd go and buy it, you take it out of a box, you put it under your desk, and you could see it as a thing,
A tower wheel.
a tower. Nowadays, it's not. It's a logical collection of resources inside a much bigger thing. Now, with that virtualization, it's really easy to move virtual machines around the world. So we would have that flexibility. So we could move, not around the world, but around the EU or around the UK. Yeah, it literally would be an engineer almost dragging and dropping a server from one screen to another, and then behind the scenes that server gets moved. That would be a design objective.
I sort of understand.
Right. Channel choice for customers. Yeah, exemplary handling of course the service response management service delivery. So we have done some work. We are certainly considering how we do that. Do we reuse the national offering, the single online home for policing, single online home for police? And or do we do some things locally? And that's an active debate at the moment. What's not up for debate is we want to effectively not just create a website where people can enter some data that somebody then has to rekey into a system, which is kind of where a lot of police forces are today, but actually when I enter my details, I'm talking directly in a secure, reliable way to the back end. So I can provide my data directly to police if I'm raising an incident, or I can get a report back of the status of my case, rather than having to have somebody email me back in a day or two's time. So this is about doing what we call straight through processing, going straight to the back end system. A virtual force control. I'm sorry, I nicked an acronym straight in there. I think regular viewers of this might understand what FCR is because it's been a topic for debate for quite some time. But this is about saying, as far as we're able to within the policing management constraints, effectively creating agents who can take calls, who can provide service anywhere in the organisation. Okay. Operationally, we need the guys and gals in the same room because when the crisis happens, they need to be able to, in real time, talk to each other. But there may be types of things that we do that means that we can we don't always have to be there. Digital intelligence and evidence gathered, stored, accessible, and integrated with policing systems. So if we take video as a form of either evidence or intelligence, at the moment most police forces, and we're the same, load it somewhere and store it, and then use another system to log the record. So this talks about automatically getting that data in and integrating it with the policing system, such that the body-worn video clip is integral in the record of the incident, as opposed to being another system. So this talks to that, Will. Digital integration with criminal justice processing systems. So for those that don't know, we deal with suspects, and we create a case file, and then we have to give that to the criminal justice system for them to form an opinion about whether or not there's to be prosecution. Today, that's quite a manual process. There is some work afoot within the Ministry of Justice to say, if you send us it to this system, we can deal with it electronically. So that we've started this journey, but I think there's more to do, a greater opportunity, in fact, a greater imperative to do that, I think. And then my last point is digital services that are feature-rich, reliable, and easy to use. So I have a vision that the stuff we give NYP employees, officers and staff, should just be as easy to use as the stuff they use at home. with extra security, obviously, but it should just be that easy to use. Yes, we shouldn't deliver less to people in the workplace than they enjoy at home.
So that sounds great, Richard. It's
only a vision.
How achieve? You know, and that's a good point. But how achievable is it? Where would you be happy in a couple of years' time?
I think this is where we need to do the delivery roadmap. So we have to start with an articulation of where we'd like to be at the end of the point in time. There are real world considerations around resource constraints and priorities and so on and so forth. Some of this stuff, as I say, we're already doing, and it's finishing bits of it. So, you know, rolling out Operation Mobile Working. We are, as an organisation, just starting to get our heads around a transformational programme, and some of this stuff will be required to enable that, and therefore the business case for it might well come out of that transformational stuff. So if we take the business insight piece that we talked about at point 4, then actually that may well be facilitated through the transformation program.
Yep.
Sorry, I wish I could tell. We should show you the roadmap, but we don't have that just yet.
Okay. Yes.
So thinking about the member of the public that might be watching at home now, we live in a really digital environment now.
Yep.
So as a police service, we should be able to deliver for those people in the community a similar service to they receive from lots of other people.
Yeah, banks or...
Yes. So for several years now, people have been able to report things online, for example, to other companies. They get text messages about you've got an appointment at such and such a time, don't forget to turn up, those sorts of things. So as an organisation, it feels as though that's normality in the world now, as opposed to something that's so innovative that it's new. So when can our communities expect that sort of service from North Yorkshire Police?
So the good news is, whereas a few years ago that was a special project, you know, you were writing bespoke software to achieve that, much of it is available now off the shelf for not a lot of money. So the barriers to delivery around a development project that might take 12 months, they've largely been overcome because of the way the market is. Our challenge around that, Lisa, is around that alignment of strategy. So how does the customer service and the digital strategy come together such that the action of digital is aligned to the business case for customer service? So my sense is resource constraints of time and cash and whatever aside, that's what we need to do, is we need to bring all of that thinking together and create that single plan that everybody buys into. So I know that other of my colleagues, our colleagues, have got a vision of the strategy there, and I think it'll happen when we kind of converge those two bits of thinking and put a little bit of investment in there. But I say it's not a lot. 10 years ago this would have been either impossible or hugely expensive and hugely risky. It's not those things now. You know, putting a web chat agent in a website now is trivial compared to where it used to be. Really trivial.
Yeah, and the police got a long way to go, really. As you say, Lisa, we are used to that now, in every other service we get, from energy to anything else, it's online by and large.
Yes.
There is an element of thinking about the demographics in North Yorkshire being slightly different, probably, and older population, etc.
Yes.
But policing,
Is it realistic to expect that the public sector can ever compete at the same speed and to the same quality as the private sector?
I'm going to say it's not realistic, but not far off in my sense. So it's not as if the private sector has access to products that we simply can't, because we can buy the same products from the same vendor. Our processes, governed in large part by legal requirements around procurement and around that kind of stuff, just tend to slow us down a bit. They shouldn't affect the attainment of the outcome, but perhaps the pace of change may be affected as a consequence of that. And also internally,
keeping up as well.
But the worry is that it's keeping up. So, you know, it was only a couple of years ago we were talking about that the cloud was not an option, and some of that wasn't our choice. Some of that was because of the security arrangements that it had to have a safe harbour, to use your language. So even some of the ones we were looking at were based in the sovereign state that happened to be in the British Isles, but that still wasn't acceptable. So we are constrained by certain things. So the thing that I'm trying to get to around the world we live in is digital, but actually we are still a people business. So two things really is, how do we ensure the strategy that's going to be developed answers what the public actually say they need, not what we think they need, And also, how much confidence do you have that you're working with the business to deliver what the business needs in order to provide that service to the public?
So, take them in reverse order. I think there is work to do. Myself personally, doesn't spend enough time talking to your team because I'm very busy keeping the lights on today. So the ambition is clear, but the ability to execute is limited because of the environment. What was the first part of the question, Dave?
It's about making sure that we're actually providing to the public what they actually want.
Oh, I see. Right. Yes. So for me, that of course is an entirely sensible thing to do. You know, talk to the people you serve and what their needs are, and there are classic ways of surveys, social media, that kind of stuff. But I think in the modern world, it's not an or, it's an and. You could have telephone and web. You don't have to make a choice. Yeah. And actually, so if you decided to not publish a telephone number and do web only, yeah, that simply doesn't work in policing, does it? Because people have a legitimate expectation, like people have a legal requirement to expect somebody to answer the phone in a crisis. But I think it's an and, not an or. I don't think we have to make many or decisions because the technology is so ubiquitous, so cheap, so easy to install for others that it should be an and.
There's a balance, because I think I'm right saying you can't call Amazon, you text Amazon and they call you. But there are ways of going about things that I think the public sector more generally, but policing as well, need to sort of figure out where we're comfortable with that sort of where customer service meets expectations. Yeah. There's a bit of work to do with that.
I think it gets interesting when you start and take people from policing and replace them with intelligence, AI. Yes, because then, and that's beyond the how do I talk to a person. It's actually who gives me the information that I need. And artificial intelligence is coming. Now, I haven't put it in there, but it's only because I had only 10 things that I wanted to talk about. Number 11 or 12 would be machine learning and artificial intelligence and all the data. We have a huge amount of data. But I think when it comes to if people knew they weren't talking to a person, that's a bit novel, perhaps might be the word, for people who consume our services, for some of them at least, I would think.
Well, we're slowly getting used to it with driverless cars and
yes.
airplanes.
Well, hopefully the ones that run people over.
No.
Yeah, not the Uber one that ran a radio the other day.
But there's a cultural thing here for me because technology is great. We've had this conversation even this morning around kind of it's not the technology, it's the culture that links to the technology about how you provide a service.
Yeah.
So very much like we all know it's perfectly feasible for a plane to take off and land without a pilot.
Yes.
Anybody here prepared to get on a plane without a pilot?
No, sir.
So it is kind of so we know we have interesting demographics here.
Yeah.
So we know people actually want to speak to a human being.
Yes.
I think it's a little bit disingenuous for them not to know it's a human being they're speaking to. Although the conversation might be a bit more interesting, you don't know. Intelligence.
Yes.
But there is something around making sure that the service we try and provide to people is actually what they want,
Yes.
not at our convenience.
Yes.
And the service has fallen this foul because we used to drag loads of people into custody for our own convenience, not necessarily because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because that's where, funny enough, the Polaroid was and the fingerprint was.
Yes.
So it's just understanding how we get that right.
Yeah.
And also not reinventing the wheel because we're in danger of doing that, aren't we? So we know that the Met, you've been down to the Met, spent a lot of money on single online home. It actually allows people to report road traffic collisions, all those sorts of things without any real kind of human intervention, which is expensive for me because I have to deploy police officers to deal with certain things. But I suppose, one of the things that when we get to what's in flight, I don't think any of them finish. They're described as being completed.
Oh, okay. I take that point actually. From a project standpoint, the project has completed.
Yeah.
So one of the key concepts I want to introduce and begin to introduce here is the notion of product. Yeah. So we might have a product that's currently version 1, which is the Operation Mobile Working Platform, the 2-serve application we'll talk about in just a minute. But actually, it's never finished. You want the next version of that, and it's either simply more forms within the application, or indeed the biometric fingerprint reader attached to the device. So I agree with you. I think the product goes on. The project might finish, and we might put a new project on for the next thing. But no, and of course, in most modern organisations, the idea of product management, i.e. the things that I deliver, is just embedded. We aren't there yet. We are very much in react, project, move on to the next thing. So organisationally, from a value set, from a culture, that's my challenge, is to bring that constant evolution of product in.
Conscious time.
Okay, yes, sorry. So digital projects overview. So for the audience's benefit, I've just exposed 7 of the projects that have recently been approved and have been delivered or are being delivered. There's also a reference in here required by North Yorkshire Police but delivered by the Home Office. So this is the core set of those national programmes we talked about. There's a national ANPR service, in my opinion, just colloquially, it's going well. We talked this morning about operationally, does that cause some other thinking for us? So that's about forces being able to share their information centrally so it can come back out to all forces, such that we could help a neighbouring force or a force in the south of England identify a vehicle that travels at the A1 in North Yorkshire that might have some drugs in it or whatever. So,
excuse me, is the risk there, Dave, that the more data that is gathered, the more work there is for the police to do? The more you look for it, the more you find.
Well, I remember the paperless office and people saying computers are going to save us a load of time, and all it does is give you more information. I suppose it would help the public to actually describe those, because a mobile asset utilisation deployment system, God love us, is probably the worst anachronism you could come up with. So, for a long time in my police service, as a manager and as a leader, you would want to know where your people are. You also want to know whether or not they go left or right when they leave the police station, because you hope they go left because that's where the intelligence of the community want them to go, as opposed to it being the best bloody shop. So there's something around, and this has been part of our strategy for a while now, around do we know where our assets are, our people, our vehicles, are they in the right place, and can we task them in a way that is seamless? And also be able to go to the public and say, do you know, when you say you've never seen a police officer, I can tell you on that street at that time these were the police officers who were there and how long they were there for. Because I've heard it all throughout my entire service that the public do not see police officers, which is actually quite interesting. At 7:30 at night when you're watching Coronation Street with your curtains closed, you will not see them, but they are there in the community protecting you 24/7. We just need to be able to articulate that in a far more sophisticated way. Linked to that is obviously we need to know where they are and what they're doing. We also need to give them the tools so they can actually do their job far more effectively. We are still scanning documents in 2018, which is not right. We are not providing them with biometric capability so they can check who they're talking to on the street rather than potentially taking them to a custody facility. And they need immediate access to the systems. And I think one of the best things we have invested in is Black Marble, which is the company that's helping us with the mobile data, because it's a geo-configured. So it will give you information depending on where you are geographically. So information about baddies, information about people who may be missing, etc. and the jobs that are happening. But for me, that's the first bit. It's the first start. It hasn't got crime reports on it yet, hasn't got missing from home reports, hasn't got road traffic collisions. So the real return on investment hasn't happened yet. The other bit, the third one, is the ANPR. We're surrounded by 7 other police forces. Between 30 and 40% of all our crimes are committed by travelling criminals. Why would we not want that capability? But you're right, it goes into the national back office. 7 million visitors to York every year. That's a lot of vehicles that up until this point we may not have had all the data that we, from other forces. We will have that now. Fortunately, we thought this through and we reconfigured all of our proactive side of policing to be able to respond to what we thought would be an increase in demand. Good news is that any baddie with any kind of marker hopefully will be nicked and face the punishment that they should face. Body-worn video again is around best use of evidence, and it leads to 3 key outcomes. One is victimless prosecutions for domestic abuse. This is about protecting the most vulnerable in our community with the best evidence available. It also provides the opportunity to reduce complaints, which is what the evidence is showing us, that people's behaviour changes if they know they're being videoed. Also a bit basic for me, which is everybody else has got a camera. It's called your phone, but we don't give our police officers the same capability. And I suppose the third one is very much linked to that sense of security for the officers as well. So all of those things are good. I think the worry is that that's a bit like Outer Hebrides gets electricity. So some of this is kind of out-of-date technology already. So if you start looking at these sorts of things into our clothing in the future, we don't have dash cams as per se in our vehicles. You've got drones, you've got a whole host of other things that, again, the private sector are already down that road. Yeah. So it's how you keep up. I think that's the concern, and I think even for our own staff, I've got my own personal phone, it does everything. Come to work, my one not necessarily as good as the one at home. and that's how you keep the staff engaged with that technology.
It's a frustrating change programme, isn't it? In that respect.
Yeah.
And then the wider one, I think, is that we do need to have to accept that we haven't got, and I think you alluded to it, isn't it? We haven't got the kind of money that you can invest to develop your own systems. So, the work the Met's done, they spent a lot of money developing stuff. They're a big organisation with billions of pounds. Some of the national stuff, we're going to have to accept and find a way of integrating it into what we've already got, rather than trying to develop our own. Which is interesting because, in the past we've all wanted to be that much better than everybody else. And that actually is an expensive way of looking at the world now, as opposed to get the technology and concentrate on the culture, because that's where you get the big return.
So in addition to the, if you like, the features and the benefits of the feature of the systems, we also have to think quite carefully, as Dave said, in one respect, about how we build them. Do we build them or do we reuse something? Yeah. But if you take video, so to us, video is a new medium. Yeah? So we have CCTV, we have in-car footage, we have potentially drones and all that kind of stuff. What we will not do, is effectively have multiple video repositories, one for drones, one for CCTV, one. So that it isn't on my list, but actually having a single place where all your video evidence is stored as a means of implementing it. Or, as Dave just said, would it be possible to piggyback on somebody else's solution? Kent and Essex, I think, have just gone to market for a digital evidence management service. So we can reuse their contract and buy our own instance, but is it beyond the wit of man that actually we just put some more discs in their server farm? We could, if we chose to do that.
I suppose on a practical level for the public, it's a bit like, so my wife was away in London over the weekend, she took some pictures, then I could see them at home.
Yeah.
But, an officer goes to a crime scene and takes some pictures, and I'm still dragging a supervisor over to look at the body for a sudden death. Yeah. We need to be asking the people who are doing this what they need in order to make their lives easier.
So that segues beautifully on to...
You think we'd planned it?
Mobile working, or Operation Mobile Working. So Mike, has been on this much longer than I, and is the operational tech lead. But this is truly transformational for North Yorkshire. Truly transformational. And it's a well-architected, well-written IT system as well. So it helps the officers do their job, but actually it's a really good system to implement and to maintain. So as you can see on the picture there, an officer equipped with one of these devices is connected and can work either on kind of general purpose stuff, emails and whatever, or indeed get access to an application, to servers, as David said, from a company called Black Marble, that will transform their world. They've got the information about the job they're doing, they've got the ability to do it electronically, they've got the whole situational awareness piece going on, so they know what's happening around them, and if they need to call for help or need to go help somebody else. It is revolutionary. I think it's an exemplar project. There's more work to do. We've put some more of those forms on there, the ones that Dave referred to. But that's relatively trivial. Having built the platform, putting more forms on is relatively trivial. Yeah, it's a bit more configuration of some different form types.
So where's the rollout at the moment? When will the public start to see all their officers, or by and large all their officers, with something they're wandering around with an iPad, or they're in the car doing a update after going to take a witness statement or something?
Well, the plan is to roll out the technology to almost all 1,400 police officers and over 200 PCSOs. We're currently rolled out the tablets, because we're just rolling out the tablets in a minute, to over 600 police officers. The mobile phones are due to commence rollout in April. So by the end of June, we hope to have all the technology rolled out to the officers and PCSOs in the initial scope. It's important, though, to raise at this stage that the officers out on the streets have already seen the benefits of this, and those without the technology are saying we'd like that technology. So an example is our major crime scene, who collaborated with Cleveland. They are crying out for that technology because it has some massive advantages when you look at the remote access to a crime scene and the ability to look at all the digital evidence and all the evidence submitted by officers immediately, to be able to review it and make some really key decisions, especially in the golden hour of, let's say, a homicide. They've already seen the advantages of the 2Serve technology, and that's what 2Serve gives us. It's really intuitive, innovative, so it's able to actually bring the crime scene to life very, very quickly. The public We'll already be seeing officers out there with tablets sat in the vans. We won't see them with the phones. They will see officers, they should see officers, more officers out on patrol. The idea is to make them more visible. The idea isn't to see them walking down the street that you see with a teenager looking at a mobile phone, so they'll bump into people. But the idea is that they take the office, so everything they can currently do, sat in the police station downstairs here at Northallerton, they can do out and about using 4G connectivity or Wi-Fi connectivity.
And it's one of those things we take it for granted because we know some of this stuff backwards, having discussed it for many years, but the public might not know. Almost every time an officer interacts with a member of the public who goes to a job, they've got to go back to the station and input everything on their computer to go back out. But we're taking off that whole return journey and work.
That waste, we're leaning the process in some respect by taking the transport out of the process.
Yeah.
And that time then goes back into doing more with that person, whether it be a victim or whatever.
And the phone does the same as a tablet?
It doesn't have all the functionality. So, for example, writing a statement, you won't be able to write a statement on the phone. Your thumbs would wear out very, very quickly. But it has the main technologies, such as where the incidents are around you. One of the key ones, stop and search, where you normally have a pad and a stop and search form. When the functionality is on the 2Serve Android phone, you will be able to do stop and search the side of the road or wherever you're doing it.
And then just going back a little bit, so we've talked about what we're doing in North Yorkshire, stuff's going on nationally, and you mentioned the major crime team, where we've got Cleveland officers and North Yorkshire Police officers working together. Are we going to have half the unit with really whizzy kit provided by North Yorkshire and half with Cleveland versions? How does that work?
No, that's something that we will look into specifically for major crime now. The technology of getting two police forces to work together has been very difficult, but that collaboration is fair to say. The 2Serve solution, just the 2Serve solution, we hope to get both officers from each force using, because operationally it has some massive benefits.
I think two things I would say, if I may. One is that some forces have done something similar but not nearly as good early, because they went for a straight e-forms solution. This is e-forms and a whole lot more, which is why it's cost more and takes longer. Dave took the view very early on with Julia, I mentioned that actually it wasn't sufficient. What you wanted was more than that. The second thing is that the data with the on the phone or on the tablet includes data from the national databases, and actually updates to the national databases will also take place that way. So even if you were on 2Serve and you updated the national database, somebody who was using a different system in another police force would still see the national database updates. The data doesn't just sit within North Yorkshire, it goes all the way back into the national database.
And we always get questions about, Wi-Fi coverage, so we've got cops in the middle of nowhere, in Bentham or wherever. What's the infrastructure there to support the sort of outside policing infrastructure to support this?
We did significant intensive testing in relation to the 4G network that we currently have, and we know that there are some black spots, as you imagine, in some dips and some valley areas. But on the whole, there's some really good connectivity with 4G. We're also able to use sort of partners, Wi-Fi if we need to. Look to the future, we can look to other things moving forward.
ESMCP, greater network coverage. Gov.Wi-Fi, something we learned from a couple of weeks ago, where many of the public sector bodies offer their Wi-Fi and internet access as a single branded authenticated network, so we need to look at Gov.Wi-Fi. But 2Serve works offline, so it doesn't not work, it just stores the data and sends it back when a connection comes available, which is what every other app does.
So it's not a town and city thing, it's
No, and I think to build on the point from the Chief, continuous improvement now, this project will never finish. We have firmly jumped with both feet into the 21st century now, and it's about now getting the best out of the technology and exploiting the technology. So the biometrics, fingerprint, we will get that in North Yorkshire, hopefully within the next 12 months, and that will be rolled out within the front line. There are other elements, such as when we get the body-worn video, is linking that in with the technology. So it's really building upon what we've got so far. The key thing, though, from the public's point of view, this has been built using operational police officers and will continue to be improved using operational police officers. So we're running innovation days where we're asking the front line, what more do you want? Because they're already chomping at the bit for wanting more functionality on it. Tomorrow I will be attending a meeting at Blackmarble with a company who supply it with other forces to talk about, right, other forces, what are your officers and staff saying they want? This is what our staff are saying, officers and staff. And then we come up with a collective agreement of, right, that's the direction we'd like to go in next. That's the company that we've invested in. They're able to actually say, right, what more functionality do you want? So it's continuous improvement is the main focus now for us.
There's an element, sorry Tom, I'll come to you next, but what you were talking about, Dave, on asking the public that, what do they want from this exactly the same question, but from their point of view, to access the police rather than the police dealing with the information they've got.
I was just going to ask, in kind of the other direction, if this is allowing people to collate all their evidence, statements, digital evidence and so on, is it also going to be really easy to click a button and send it all to the CPS for a charging decision?
So that's the next.
Not yet.
But that's a piece of work. So some of my team are going over to Merseyside in the next week to look at systems that they're currently using, which will assist them to do that. So there are systems out there that will. It will be another project that I'll speak to Rich about, that Rich is really already aware of, because we do need to make it seamless. Yeah. It's about speeding up that process to get that result for the victim as quickly and efficiently as we can. So that's definitely something we need to do.
Yeah. And I think the reality is, it's like any collaboration or partnership, the more partners in it, the more complex it gets. So, we do know there are off-the-shelf products that, as a result of conversation with the Met around, so digital sort of storage of video, for example, because everybody's got it, cyclists have got it, everybody's got dash cam type footage. So you can get that and collate it. We have a very clunky process like most of the forces, and if you have a major incident, there are capabilities around. You want everybody's social media input as well. So there is something you can go for where you basically literally go up to it, and rather than everybody transporting it around, you can just put code in and you can access that piece of software. It doesn't need to be held by anybody in a sense.
And that's one of the prima facie benefits of cloud, isn't it? Because it's not in our data centre, it's in the global data centre, and subject to security controls, we can give access to whomever.
So from a court purposes, if you want to see the video and the CCTV on Richmond High Street, you can tap away and there it comes. You're not reliant on it coming by post, unfortunately.
Or having to send an officer in a car to go pick it up, or whatever it is, And then my last slide, digital policing body-worn video. Okay, so this week we will be receiving the first batch of these cameras.
Sorry, Rich, you need to move the slide.
Oh, sorry, I pressed it on my laptop, not on the. I do apologise. So before we go into this, NYP are already using body-worn video for the I don't want to say the word fracking, the shale gas extraction at Kirby Misperton. We purchased some cameras. And Mike can attest to just the value of them in that operational context. Very, very useful. We've placed an order.
They're used elsewhere too, aren't they? In York and some of the places, PCCs.
There are some sporadic cameras out there that community safety partnerships have funded over the last few years, which are being used sporadically by PCCs.
Yes. So nationally, there is an increasing body of evidence as to the value of forces using body-worn video. As I was driving to work this morning, Andy Battle from West Yorkshire here on the Radio 2, talking about tasers, 30% reduction in taser use in West in the last years. Yeah, and faster convictions and earlier guilty pleas were the three things he talked about. So we believe those will be evident here, but what we're doing is having watched the marketplace to make sure that we bought the right kit, not an early, an alpha version that really wasn't up to much. The technology we purchased, which is a hardware-software combo, is very good, very capable. It's in use elsewhere. We're rolling it out, but we're taking great care to understand what the benefits and perhaps any disbenefits are here before we press the button to complete the rollout, probably later this year. I know benefit isn't a word that So to the public, what does it mean? To officers, what does it mean?
Yeah, I presume that'll come along with policies. I think some forces have it on all the time. Some turn it on when they go.
There's not a single battery in the world that will last the 10-hour tour of duty. It's a discretionary choice of the officer.
Right. So if they're going to use the police powers, we would expect them to turn it on. The policy and procedure that will be written will be in line with the College and Police and guidelines.
Yeah. So and those cameras will not be deployed unless and such time all those things are in place and people are trained and competent with them. So any possibility that we'll operate out of policy or whatever, I think is hugely diminished by that. The 1.4 million, there's a decision notice that talks about 1.4 million will be made available subject to those benefits being identified and confirmed. The first tranche of circa £300,000 I think has and it has been approved and is being spent.
I hope so, because you've ordered it.
No, they're coming. They should be here before Easter.
So subject to the sort of, you know, the rollout as benefits are sort of seen, when, given the public should start seeing tablets and phones with officers quite soon, when should they start to notice?
Late spring, early summer.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be too specific. And they might not see them because firearms officers will be the first recipients, on the basis that the operational need to protect officers and monitor what they do is the national requirement.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And if you see an AFO, it's not very common, is it? I imagine. Yeah.
Depends on what you're up to.
If you're up to no good, possibly. No, but they're less common, aren't they, than your every run-of-the-mill, everyday response officer.
So how many are coming out in the first tranche then?
300.
Yeah,
We don't have 300 armed response officers, just to make sure.
No,
So initially there's going to be enough. The cameras are issued on a pool basis. There's enough to cover the 70 authorised firearms officers that we've got in the force. We then have over 200 taser officers to be able to cover. They'll be the focus of the second tranche.
Yeah.
After we've rolled out to the firearms officers, and then to response officers. And the key one around that is those attending domestic related incidents
For the victimless prosecutions.
Victimless prosecutions. We want everybody who's going to a domestic to have the ability to have the technology for body-worn video. So that's the aim. And then our custody suites as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the main focuses, is to make sure that everybody in a custody suite has access to body-worn video.
And that would supplement the in-custody CCTV, wouldn't it? It's not as if there isn't.
Yeah, so we've got some really good state-of-the-art CCTV in custody as well.
Yeah. So
there's a lot, you know, for the public. I know there's still a lot to do. Go back to your 10 sort of policing crime plan related points, but they'll start to see a sort of hopefully transformational change. Certainly from an officer's point of view, transformational change, but start noticing a difference quite quickly now.
Yeah, I just think that we have to recognise, and as the HMI, that actually it's taken us a bit longer than it should have taken. And I think that's part of some of the transformational stuff we need to do around having identified a need, how we actually implement that need. So I think that's part of the conversation we've been having this morning, because there is some off-the-shelf stuff that we can sort of go
And sometimes you sort of want to be at the forefront and you take risks like the Black Marble decision, and sometimes you wait, like body worn, until it's sort of a proven concept with the right kit somewhere else, and we just, you know, it's a balance of
and then so my last slide is sorry, I've done it there on my laptop rather than. So again, 10 no more. Cloud migration, we talked about that. Infrastructure as a service. Yeah, so freeing up resource to focus on systems and change. Applications, so that systems consolidation and convergence. So fewer of them and fewer instances of them, and specifically about moving to a web type application architecture. Many of police is quite a narrow market for technology vendors, and some of the products are quite long in the tooth, and they predate the web as a concept. So we need to refresh them to make them web applications, and that makes them easier to use, but also means that we can integrate with them much more easily than we can today.
Predate the web. I can imagine a 17-year-old trying to figure out what that.
Well, yes.
Well, you still have tapes at the Police National.
Make the network. Sorry, I borrowed an IBM sales pitch from the 1990s. This is about connectivity not being a barrier. It'll be remote, mobile, or in between our offices at the moment. Because networks were quite expensive, we manage their resources quite carefully. They're much cheaper now. Networks are much cheaper. So rather than doing an upgrade a year across 50 locations, I'd much rather just sink some investment in there and just not be a problem for us.
Is that partly why there's such a pace in policing at the moment? Partly there's a lot to catch up on compared to sort of private sector examples, but cost has come down effectively, so it's much easier to just get these things sort of in and tested and implemented.
So a 1 gigabit per second link, and that's a million megabits, 1,000 megabits, depending whether American or British. So it's a lot. £35,000 a year. When I were a lad, when I started, you couldn't buy it, and a fraction of that was like £100,000 a year. So the price performance has just gone through the roof for networks. So we should just not make that an issue for us.
Richard, sorry, just in the history of the IT industry, it's fascinating, isn't it? So you had IBM who made the big computers, and then Microsoft came along and thought, no, the money's out of the software.
Yes.
Are you not worried that the money's now going to be out of the storage? So we're all going to put all this money because there's so much data that we're capturing.
Yes.
Just body-worn video, let alone
Yeah.
ANPR.
Yeah.
Terabytes, and I can't remember what the other ones after that
Yeah.
are.
Peta.
But we're in danger of there being a monopoly here, aren't we? If we're not
There are.
careful.
I mean, look, the IT industry is there to make money. Yeah, it's a business, and so on and so forth. And therefore, they will charge the most they can for the things they bring to market latest. Infrastructure, compute, storage, whatever, network connectivity is commodity stuff now. There's no real value in it. It's all in the software.
So is there something around, UK.gov coming up with their own kind of storage capability
Yes.
rather than the private sector?
Yeah.
Because in a different life,
Yeah.
I remember the days when policing bought just British Leyland vehicles,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then they all went on strike,
Yeah.
and actually there were
Yeah.
no spare parts. The fleets were grounded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So none of this is new. It's just a different format.
No. So if you think about cloud service providers, Microsoft set out, they operate what I call a hyperscale. So their price per unit of consumption is a fraction of what we might ever get to when we're operating 1,300 users and whatever. But actually, if you aggregate all of government's demand into a single instance, you get to pretty good scale. So I think there is definitely something about government data centres and government networks. But then politics and policy and procurement and all that kind of stuff. It does. The things we put in for a different purpose.
But I think one of the challenges for policing going forward in our society is this competing demand for more and more information.
Yes.
And people's insatiable desire to share the fact that they're going for a cup of coffee with the rest of the world, and how that's all stored and pictures and imagery and all that sort of stuff. And on the other side, where we've seen that information being used for a purpose it was never intended for.
Yes.
And there is something about the public being really satisfied that we have the security around this information.
Yes.
Because when stuff from us leaks, that has a really damaging impact.
It does, doesn't it? Yes. They trust us, don't they, to store their data in a way they don't trust their banks, perhaps.
Well, I think that's a really important point. So that there is just as there's a data security requirement and perception seen internally, particularly within law enforcement, because of the enforcement nature of the organisation. There is a significant body of concern around what law enforcement bodies do with their sensitive data. And in fact, where we came into this with the change in legislation, I would say that almost all the changes in legislation that we're about to embrace in May have been brought about by individual challenges. They haven't been brought about by some great awakening in policy. They have been largely data subjects who felt sufficiently offended by the way their personal data has been used that they've gone all the way to court. And actually the reference that Rich made to Safe Harbour, the Safe Harbour Agreement is the parallel agreement between all European member states and the United States. And a single individual who was unhappy about what was done with his data crossing the border brought it down because it hadn't been thought through well enough, applied well enough. So I think the policy, procedure and practice and the legislative framework will be absolutely key. So there will be people who think, I'm not reassured by the presence of a body-worn video camera because I don't know what's happened to my kids walking in the background, for example, who may be captured as an image or some other thing where, which isn't the same when you're exchanging photos about, look, Tom's off to have a coffee and he wants to tell me if he hasn't got time to have a coffee. And that element, I think, is also part of why the early adopter bit is harder for law enforcement bodies, or public bodies generally, because we have to nail that stuff down as well before we can jump on board, whereas anybody else who hasn't got that sort of investigative and enforcement nature doesn't have to.
And we have to get slicker at this, because at the moment, if you want personal data that's held on the police national computer taken off, that comes to me.
Yes.
So if you think of all the records that we have, and it's around making sure that we collect the information in the right way in the first place with all those safeguards, and have a good weeding policy. I mean, we are actually spending quite a lot of money just going through digitising all our paper records, going back 20 years. Partly think that we should have just got rid of them all, it would have been a lot easier. But once you've got the information, and because of historic inquiries and stuff like that, it's more and more important that you don't. But I think the issue around the data storage is it's just exponential.
It is. And just put some numbers on today, just as one data point I do have, people might Our cost per terabyte, the kind of big number, is several thousands of pounds per, because of the way we do it. Google is about $150 a year for exactly the same amount, and that's because they're operating at hyperscale. But I think if we could line ducks up in policing nationally or government nationally, we could get to $200 per terabyte. Yeah, and that might be the right thing to do, but it feels too hard. If I'm honest.
On data, I can't remember if you mentioned Tom Free did, but you saw that company who it's about not collecting data you don't need to. For body worn video, they automatically blur out faces.
Oh yes.
That aren't the
so
subject
we,
of
we have the idea.
So
that
there's ways to limit what
yes.
your sort of the knock-on consequences of data capture.
Yeah, but that's quite recent. So that was an early discussion with some of the police forces that had picked that up.
Yeah.
But I think also so that's right at the highest tech end, and our great ambitions to get there. Again, if we come back to some of the things that have been discussed that the Chief just mentioned and Mike's mentioned, bottom line, wherever you create a dependency, you create a risk.
Yeah.
And if we create a dependency on information systems entirely to fill out a statement or to check someone's details or to find out who they really are, and we have a simple denial of service, which isn't from malware, it might be that the battery's run out, or it might be the wretched device doesn't work today. Unless we've got some plan B business continuity arrangement that does go back to sticks and stones, we will design ourselves out of some of the real basic things that are keeping people safe this afternoon, and that's something we've got to guard against.
Partly what's going right back to the beginning, we've only got 5 minutes to finish this switch, if that's all right, but you've got 75 staff keeping the lights on at the moment, but we've now got another 600 very swanky iPads.
So the team has been sized. The project brought funding bodies to allow us to accommodate that. But the FTE per unit of service ratio is wrong, and the costs reflect that value for money. So we should be able to provide. We should operate different places in the value chain. So it's about helping deliver information to cops and manage change rather than polishing tin, as I call it. And also by doing that a different way. So those are the levers. Moving to different places in the value chain, and also reducing the cost of some things. And then those dials, those KPIs will come into more natural, comfortable comparison. Just to go through, if I may, a thing called an information broker at 0.5, which is a piece of software whose sole job in the world is to pass data between organisations, taking a person out, taking the human error out, automatically redacting information if they can't see the whatever it is. And actually, I think there is potentially a case for a national one of these. Okay, because we all have the same problem, we all change. So rather than NYP having one, and I think I'm going to have a conversation with the National Police Technology Council about this. I talked about business process management, that's number 6. A cloud-based digital evidence management service, an acronym, DEMS. So we know the Met use an off-the-shelf piece of software to good effect there.
We know Essex thing.
No, that's the commercial storage as a service offering. So there's definitely some pragmatism required there. Digital freedom. So Dave talked about mobile phones and how it's different. Whatever. We definitely want to give people tech that is as feature-rich and as easy to use but secure at work. Keep people engaged, to keep people productive, to keep people,
There's the argument about bringing your own device, wasn't there? But I think that.
Well, I think we should seriously look at that. I mean, in my view, just my own view, I don't process the same data as Mike. Yeah. So Mike, serious organised crime data or child exploitation data or whatever it is, BOID might not be the right thing for Mike, but I do emails about projects and about HR matters, and every other private sector organisation allows BYOD. So we're definitely hunting that opportunity down, because that would be a cost saving for us, I think. And then enterprise systems management. So what we don't have today is a system that helps us manage the service. Yeah. So if you think about it, this is my dashboard on my machine. What's running hot, what's short of resources, what's broken, what do I need to fix. Yeah, we don't have a good one of those just at the moment, so it's invisible to policing, but it's essential. And then my last one is that benchmark. Yeah, I said when I arrived a year ago that I wanted to increase the value demonstrably of the expenditure and investment, and the best way to do that, the only way to do that, is by benchmark. but not just with other police forces, but actually with comparable private sector organisations, because that's where the real value comparison, I think, best sits. Digital transformation. So we talked about organisational transformation a little bit at the beginning of the meeting. We reflected that NYP and the PCC are working on this. My view is that digital is at the heart of that. I think it's a digital-enabled transformation. We need to do more of the OMW stuff for everybody, and that everybody can be more efficient and effective. And I add the other E in there. So the effective efficiency are standard policing definitions. There's also the excellence of customer service. Sorry, I do apologise. I've done it again, haven't I? It's that one. Yeah, sorry. So that's the outcome. It's about a reinvention of our organisation with digital at its heart. Yeah, to build on the good work that we've done with some of our applications, addressing the issues that we've got.
Richard, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My head hurts a little bit, but I think that was a very helpful background, and hopefully gives us a food for thought for the next few years as well. But there's lots going on in the meantime, and I hope the public will start to see a visible difference, visible in the sense they should see more officers, I hope. We'll move on to agenda item 5 then, which Phil, I think you had the pleasure of taking on, which is an update.
Mike, you just pass.
In no man's land.
Okay, the first few slides are generic ones.
Yeah.
I think they've been up for a while, so I know the public have had access to those. So I'll move to the one that I think displays information that we need. So just looking at where the costs have gone in relation to Operation Kingfisher, so our operation against hydraulic fracture in Kirby Misverton area. So for February this year, the additional costs for policing are £30,772. So obviously a further reduction on January's costs in relation to that, is significantly down from September and October and November of last year. In relation to that then, so activity by the company Third Energy is due to cease shortly, with equipment being removed from the site, and then no further work anticipated until very later on in the year. As a result of that, our operation has seen our resources return back to local policing areas and bolster the local policing teams in the areas that are out on patrol. So in terms of that, we will be looking to stand that operation down in relation to that until later in the year.
A sort of short-term drawing the line in the sand until something potentially happens later in the year.
Should members of the public be kind of noticing a return of local officers, do you think?
They should already be noticing
that.
So the reason why the costs are down significantly in February is because a lot of those resources have been returned to local policing.
That presupposed they missed them to begin with.
Well, of course, I would hope they never had.
I don't think we can comment on particular cases, but the public might have seen court cases start to come through now. So from some of the arrests that have been through
There's the first couple in the mostly during May and June, I think.
Yeah.
So they'll start to come through to the public. This will sort of stay in the public domain, but not related to the actual operation anymore, because they're sort of from months past arrests.
And there's obviously been commentary by the judge in relation to where they see the threshold, and certainly the use of sort of these constructions doesn't seem to be crossing the line, hence the reason for their arrest.
And I think now we've got a good understanding of the costs and the operations drawn to a close, we can start having those conversations with the government and the Home Office about getting some money back potentially. So we'll keep the public up to date on that as well.
Just language, the operation from a public order perspective is in a different phase, but the criminal justice process is in full swing, so the operation is still ongoing.
Correct.
So it's the language, because obviously we may be able to claim some of those costs as well.
Yeah. So I think we'll have a look at whether it stays on the agenda in the short term. Maybe it's worth one more of a summary potentially to sort of discuss more widely how it went, but possibly take it off and bring it back as and when the operation at the site kicks off again.
And again, just to be helpful for the public, as with these sorts of operations, because of the phase it's now going into, there's a full debrief around the lessons learned about how it's gone in all its different guises.
It's whether any of that can come to one of these meetings, which might be helpful just to sort of wrap it up until we have to open that box back up again. Lee, switching over to you on performance more generally.
Okay, so this has been a bit of a swap round. We're having a bit of an experiment with the performance pack this month. So the first one is familiar to you. So this is the people information for the organisation. So this should look very familiar because it's up here month on month, just tracking the recruitment, retention levers in the organisation, and just with some commentary there. So that looked like a familiar slide in terms of police officer and PCSO recruitment. As you can see there, that we track the predictable levers of the organisation from a police officer perspective, which is often easier because of the retirement profile. It's generally predictable, but as you'll see there, we've had a couple more people leave the organisation as a result of resignations and transfers to other forces that weren't counted in the standard retirement figures. So our review of our recruitment will reflect those additional levers, and as you'll see, we have got a recruitment programme ongoing. Of note in this particular area of business, and we haven't finished the process yet, we've obviously run a campaign very recently focusing on positive action. We haven't concluded that yet, but we've had a very, very positive outcome in terms of attracting a much more diverse group of recruits this time round. So we want to make that process more of business as usual so that we can, as an organisation, build on that breadth of diversity across the organisation. So that's good news. And as you can see, the PCSO recruitment continues.
And I should just say, I know the numbers aren't quite finalised yet because the process isn't totally complete, but it looks like a lot of work from quite a number of people in HR and elsewhere have paid dividends in that respect. So it's really good to see those numbers come through.
Okay, busy slide this one, so that's again the same HR overview that we reflect every month in terms of staff and departments across the organisation and the full-time equivalent numbers within the organisation and the projections going forward in time. Unless there's any questions on that.
Well, not for me, anybody else? No.
And then just the total budget figures that we see each month. And then of note really the citizens in policing work. So it's really nice to see just the breadth of volunteering that's going on in the organisation, which is a work in progress. Obviously the Chief is the national lead for citizens in policing. So there's a whole raft of work going on around volunteering within policing, not only in North Yorkshire but connecting up with the national work that's going on and best practice.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, so this is slightly different in terms of a performance pack. So over the past 6 months, I would say, the traditional performance pack has been developed. So we've been doing some demand capacity capability work, which is also linking into our force management statements. So for the public listening, the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service this year are changing their inspection regime. So we would normally have an inspection coming up in spring as part of the Peel inspection on police efficiency, effectiveness, legitimacy, but that's actually moved to autumn to take account of a new way of measuring the capacity, capability and demand facing policing.
Sounds exciting.
So each force is currently working on what's called a force management statement, which will be a draft this year, but going forwards will be a publishable document for each of the police services, which shows what the future projections of demand are on policing in those particular police areas, regional and national collaboration related demand, and what we as a police service collectively, Police UK, have got in terms of resource and skills to deliver a service to the public in those areas where we think demand is going to take place. So on the back of that, we've tried to modernise our performance regime and look at time-based policing. So what do we actually spend our time doing? So some of the traditional police statistics that we saw up here were very much red, amber, green, raw numbers, but what does that actually mean in terms of what we spend our time doing? So this is an experiment today, I suppose. Yeah. So we've taken bits of performance packs to different meetings. So I know there's been a very clear focus on mental health, for example, so we've experimented with some of these and we've now brought it together in one pack. So this is a work in progress, so feedback would be gratefully received. So most of this is time-based including numbers, but then how much time we actually spend doing things. So this first slide looks at our proactive tasking. So what do we spend our time proactively looking at? And these are our proactive resources that we talked about earlier. So when the Chief talked about ANPR and how we've already restructured some of our resources to create that capacity, if you like, to respond to some of the proactive opportunities. So this shows our firearms support unit, operational support units and roads policing group and what they spend their time doing.
And this is a mixture of reactive and planned?
Yes, that's correct. So they run proactive operations, but also they might react to certain things. So we've talked about ANPR and the opportunity of travelling criminals coming into our area, and these particular individual resources then going out and arresting the naughty people that are crossing our borders that have been highlighted by the ANPR system. But also proactive operations where we've gathered intelligence and we then create an opportunity to protect the public by reacting to that intelligence, but in a planned way, if you like. So the intelligence and information that we use to then spend our time doing some of these proactive taskings. So that just gives an indication of time. It's obviously pleasing to see that our roads policing group do spend their time on safer roads, but they also protect our borders, for example.
Can I ask what that? So I think most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Border vulnerabilities. Is that something suspicious, or what does that mean?
So we know, based on intelligence, that we have cross-border criminality, and we know where some of those greater vulnerabilities are in terms of key roads into the county, other roads into the county that might be used for suspicious reasons, for example. So in order to protect our communities in North Yorkshire, we've got key locations.
So that would be proactive rather than reactive.
So, I mean, hopefully from the public's perspective, the obvious one is the safer roads. You'd expect our roads patrol groups to that's their core business. So you'd also expect the firearms support unit, which is your armed response vehicles and a few other bits and pieces, to focus on the high-end risk. So that's why the blue is, for people who can see it online, you're looking at terrorism, domestic extremism, serious and organised crime, linked to the operational support unit, which is in a sense like our roads crime type team. So they're going to be very proactive. So based on intelligence, we will know they're the people who are tackling our organised crime groups, and you sit on the organised crime group panel. So that's far more kind of proactive planning. But again, our armed response vehicles will respond to some of the sort of other issues like safeguarding the vulnerable, and that's around kind of they will respond to domestic violence incidents, for example, where we know there's a report of potential serious violence, and they obviously are our most highly trained and highly equipped part of the organisation. And it's reassuring to see that they're actually doing what they're told to do.
So in relation to that, then, given that is the proactivity bit, and that's focusing, so that is exactly what you said, isn't it? That's what they're told to do. The numbers stack up and say that's what they're... Would you expect these to reflect the almost circumstantial, not quite accidental thing? So if you had an RPG team stopping a vehicle that turns out in the end to contain serious organised crime group members, would that ever be reflected on here in terms of actuals, or rather than what they were set off to do? Does that make sense?
I mean, if it was a predetermined, we want you to go and look out for this black BMW, we think it's an OCG from Manchester supplying drugs to Scarborough, and we stop it and do it. If they just happen to stop because the tail light's out, to use an American expression, that's just...
Then they wouldn't appear on it.
As Napoleon would say, what I need is lucky generals. But
so
hopefully they're in the right place, because they'll know the transport routes, for example.
Better to be lucky than good.
Yes.
So, I mean, but again, what I'm trying to do is not have people look for stuff on there that wouldn't be on there anyway.
Yeah, and also, I suppose eventually when you start applying things like mods on top of it, and you then know actually, are we getting those results because we are actually putting people in the right place? So we know the certain routes in, and when they're coming back with their loot, other roads are used. So again, we need to make sure, and being able to evidence from my perspective, that we're deploying in those on an intercept capability.
Because I don't know what the measures be. It's interesting the activities obviously are some results you've had. The outcome of that work, so are the Safer Roads group patrolling the right bits? So what has their time spent doing that resulted in? And that's the sort of next bit. And I don't know what the measuring is attached to that, but...
And this is how it all links up with operational mobile working, modes, taskings and the control strategy, and then monitoring how that impacts on keeping the public safe. So we'll be able to join all of those things up. We've talked about operational mobile working, and we waited to get an innovative solution where you could be driving down a street and the tasking system will push that information, so you know what's going on in that street. You know that there's been a serious and organised crime type job in that street, or you know there's a missing person from that area and you can look for them. And it's joining those things together and then seeing the impact that it has on keeping the public safe.
And to some degree this is cleaner because of the nature of the units and what they do. I'm just wondering time-wise for the public, if we went into one of the response, I know we've done the force control room before, there's lots of investment and we'll monitor that, but if you go to the slides around one of the sort of response areas.
So I also get a much more detailed report into the ops board that I chair in terms of the activity that takes place. So that slide is a higher level for you.
Yeah. Do you want to go to that slide now?
Yeah, the city response.
So just in terms of, obviously we'll do the FCR performance. So if you look at the difference between the proactive resources, so this is the city response officers' data, and this is both numbers and time. So numbers of incidents that they deal with and the time they spend dealing with those incidents. So as you can see then, this is the month of February this year, and it's a similar picture actually. We split it down into city, the coastal area of Scarborough, Rydale and County Command, and again it just shows the breakdown of what the response officers and other units in terms of being dispatched, as you can see on the bottom graph there, what they're spending their time looking at as a time-based profile in the city.
Because one of the things we're very keen on is as soon as you do time, you can put a cost on it. So we know, for example, that the PSW stands for Public Safety and Welfare, so that'll be missing from homes, cause for concern type, which is mental health, which we know is a significant drain on policing resources. But the one to point out is people often talk about crimes only 20%. They are 20% of incidents, but if you look at the amount of time we spend investigating crime, is far higher than 20% of the number of incidents, because it's becoming more and more complex, linked back to the digital conversation we just had. If you're going to arrest somebody, they come with lots of digital evidence. That could be their Fitbits, that could be their sat-navs, that could be their Xbox, all contain information of a use to an investigation. What we need to unpick, and this is incredibly valuable information for us as we get more and more of this real-time, Richard, around the kind of business insight information. So what is it we're spending on public safety and welfare? Why are we spending so much time and money in those areas? Because a lot of that will not be the statutory responsibility of the police service. But I haven't got the evidence to go back to partners to say...
That's what we're spending our time doing.
But, yeah, one of the other things that this would lend itself, it's a while since I mentioned it's a subject dear to my heart, but this sort of illustration would lend itself to tracking the use of NPAS. So the National Police Air Service, because of dispatching, because we do pay into it, as everybody knows. But North Yorkshire is one, in my experience, one of a very small number of forces who, let's say, on the daily 24-hour chief's log, will put where they've called for the helicopter, or soon fixed wing as well. But one of the problems that the National Police Air Service has is understanding the overall local use, and then working out, not just the financial contribution, but what is the contribution it made to finding that missing from home or dealing with that vehicle or whatever. But the information should be fairly easily obtained from West Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, one of the things not on there, because that's about dispatches, is how much time your supervisors spend overseeing whatever it might be. So it might be they spend all their time supervising public safety and welfare.
Yeah.
Because the thing for us is also to understand, because that's obviously the jobs you've been dispatched to and the time you spent at the job. What it doesn't tell you is how much you've spent on the bureaucracy and the admin that was related to that, and anything else that you're doing as well, which will be the fascinating bit for us.
A bit after that. So.
Yeah. And also developing this.
Simon?
No, don't turn it off. Also developing that data into, so how many of those public safety and welfares are repeat callers?
Yes.
Because there's some other part of the system letting them down. So that won't be single issue jobs. That might be 10 of those public safety and welfare cases are repeat attendance by us, because there are other parts of either the health system, partner system, social care, etc.
to be honest, I imagine lots of the crime and ASB are repeat jobs as well.
The longer term problem solving that needs to happen in the community. So as we develop this, it will give a much richer picture of what's happening out there in our communities and what we spend our time doing. So shall I do the rest of the slides for the local police and go back to the FCR?
Because it's interesting, before we even get there, they're so similar. It's
So you'll hardly notice the difference as we go through this. That,
and I think that would be the same across UK policing.
Yeah. When you look at them, it's just the amount of time and number of incidents that we're attending. And you talked about supervision, so response sergeants are on there, and as you can see, the purple bit on there is that they spend a lot of time supervising public safety welfare.
It's so hard to see because the bars are so small.
So we spend a lot more time. I don't know, that's just because of the number of dispatches, isn't it? That's not the time we've actually spent on dealing with an incident, is it?
So no, the chart on the left
time.
are the number of jobs we've dispatched to.
Yeah.
The chart on the right is the amount of time in hours and minutes we've spent dealing with those incidents. So in the coastal count, so Scarborough Rydale have spent in February 1,534 hours on public safety and welfare incidents.
Is that just for the call out? What does that time cover?
So that's come from time-based incident log measurement. So you dispatch to the job, they call themselves off as attending the scene, and then they call up that they've dealt with that job and they've moved on. There might be paperwork, clerical, other things to do after that, but they've cleared from that job in terms of the storm log.
So if they're missing from home took 48 hours to resolve, that goes, that's...
That log will be open for that length of time.
It depends on, so that element, the time base there, so an officer will call a status for when they get dispatched to the job, which starts the clock ticking. When they leave that job, they'll call a different status which stops the clock. So whilst the missing from home could be 48 hours, you could have 4 or 5 different officers dealing with that missing from home over that period of time as they hand over shifts to those different tasks. So that all gets captured and concertinaed down.
So it's not just the first cop response bit, it's the
whilst it's on the command and control storm element. When it transfers from the control room onto our niche record management system, then that's the bit that the chief and the dep are talking about that doesn't get captured. So all you're seeing is the hours whilst it's overseen by the control room, that's what you're getting. You're not getting all the bit after that.
So this is response. So this is the initial call. So where you look at the crime there of 330 incidents attended by response, and they spent 1,054 hours, that's the initial investigation. So X percentage of those will have then been allocated to an investigator, gone into the hub. So that's a different measurement. So we'll be able to produce graphs that show, right, how long did we take investigating that particular thing. So you arrest 3 people at the scene, it takes you 3 hours to do your arrest statement, the house to house, etc. You hand it over. There might then be another graph that shows 20 hours worth of police officer or police staff investigator time that's been spent dealing with that job to conclusion.
So if those charts at the top right hand chart covered end to end, from when it was called into when the case is closed, effectively, you'll see the red bar go like that because that's the
because you'd have to put weeks, not hours there for some of them. The other thing that the real prize for us, and obviously which is where Phil will get it in the neck, is why there are discrepancies between certain commands and others.
So what's even the next
so how long you're taking in the county to deal with something compared to somewhere else.
And my example was in York and Selby and Hamilton, Richmond,
County.
They've got a similar level of crime, but it takes York 200 more hours to deal with it. And now there might be a very good reason for that, but is that the kind of thing that you're going to be using this to then?
Because there'll be certain types of crime category depending on the area.
Of course,
and that, depending on the nature of the crime, is how long you're going to take. And it's a bit like PSW. If you do flick through them quick enough, there are differences, and it's I'm sure they'll do it in a way that will make it easier for me.
Need one of those books, don't we? You know those books you used to draw the little picture of the person that you flick through.
But that the ratio is even at this instant response level is really the ratio of left to right. Then is unarguable, isn't it? And if that ratio changes significantly across command, that's the chat with you, Lisa, presumably.
So crime there is about 3 hours per job, isn't it? You're 16
and
what's no one, it's different numbers, isn't it?
Just caveat with that, you're not comparing apples with apples.
No. But over long-term trends,
So it is. The bit for me that's interesting is when you start to compare the difference, like so crime versus PSW, etc.
Yeah.
You start to see where our officers are spending their time.
So do you
Can
get that
you break
breakdown?
PSW down? So not
Yeah.
not
Yes.
Yeah.
You can.
So you get a breakdown of. Would we be able to see that potentially?
Yeah, the breakdown's been available for it's on our systems that's really available. The interesting one is for me is around again trying to link the conversation today. So if you look at roads, for example, and the amount of time we're spending on roads, there is a clear difference between the county compared to other places for obvious reasons around geography.
The colours don't add up, I'm sorry. The
But
different
how
colours
many
are-
of those are actually damage-only road traffic collisions, where we
Yeah.
have no statutory obligation to go to? And if you had an online system, people want the reference number. We struggle to give them that simplistic piece of information for their insurance companies.
Yeah.
And we know from the Met about 80% of all their road traffic collisions are now on that system. So that's where you'd start to see the benefits and efficiencies through the use of IT. But it'd be interesting to break some of these down into more granular detail. But the difficulty is, as we will have this conversation, Tom, you can never ask enough because people always want more, don't they? And the issue is, it's the 80-20 principle. We need 20% information to make an 80% judgment, not 8% the other way around.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to the slides before that. So the FCR, obviously we had a big pack every month for FCR, but we were just repeating ourselves every month with here's all the things we're doing. So we've pared it down to the 2 slides in terms of the actual raw performance, which is the thing that's the movable feast now. So all of the other things we've rehearsed for the last 6 months of the changes we've made to operator function, the staffing, and then obviously the business case that came out of that. So we've now moved to obviously here is the measure, if you like, of what's the success of what's being put in place and continue to monitor that. So the first slide's on 999 performance. As you can see, there are some fluctuations because of certain months there's higher call volumes than others. There's obviously key annual leave periods during key holiday periods and numbers of staff. But we should start to see then with the intakes and the work from the business case that consistency in terms of performance measures now. So this shows the overall picture as a graph for 999 in terms of calls answered and calls presented.
Sorry, just the other thing, I think that there was maybe a sort of vague hope that what we saw last year wasn't the new norm. But as you can see, we've got 1,000 extra 999 calls in January compared to the previous year. So there's something systemic happening, and it's not just us, it's across the nation.
Yeah.
And, again, in February as well, you're classic with the weather. You probably picked up, I think, on the first hour or 2 hours on one of the weather days, we had about 30 accidents within the space of an hour because people can't cope with snow.
The beast from the east has caused us issues in March as well, certainly from 999 calls.
Leisha, I've asked this a few times, and that's head scratching about the increase in calls to 999, and no one really seems to know why yet.
No, I mean nationally there's a whole national working group that's still researching, shall we say, at the background. Because BT noticed an increase from 80,000 to over 100,000, which is a massive leap in terms of that increase. And we tried to do, even to go back to the basics of, your 5-bar gate when people ring in, what is it that they're ringing up about? And it's all sorts of things. So it's, and we've also spoken to partners, and there's a similar phenomenon going on in all public sector organisations of society has become more sensitised to ringing up about everything, reporting things, which people
we
want.
We also ask as well for citizens and counter-terrorism citizens, or whatever they were called. It's self-fulfilling in that respect, isn't it?
But also, when you look at some of the health service data that came out over the winter months, is people's reliance on the public sector has also seen that shift, which is a societal shift as opposed to just policing, but on all public sector type organisations are starting to feel it. So that research is still underway, and no doubt somebody's already started a PhD on it, I would think, in some university somewhere about what is it about the changing society that's...
But I think it's York University.
But I think one of the things, I suppose, from the public, from a reassurance point of view around kind of the investment in the control room, I think this continues to sort of, there's a justification for that investment because the demand isn't going any other way but up at the moment. I mean, what we need to get to is to try and understand why it's going up and reduce the demand. But I think we are still the only people open 24/7, 365 days a week, and other areas are shrinking, and we seem to be where people are coming to as that point of reference.
So then moving on is the 101 in a similar way. And again, it's this expectation about is the call handling or the call numbers going to gradually go down? But we know traditionally that we see a rise in the summer, which we talked about in the business case. So hopefully that investment, there is a direct correlation almost, one for one, on physical number of calls and the speed of answer in terms of how quickly you can get to those calls. So it is a numbers issue unless you can reduce the demand coming in or streamline your processes in some way, which is what we've tried to do with crime recording. So remove some of that demand from the control and to free people up to do their core responsibility of answering the calls for service.
And it's hard to know what impact what change has had. So I assume it was staffing in January, there were more calls, but they were answered quicker. I presume that was
and fewer people have time off in January, so they have the Christmas off and they come back. And so it's all those, it's quite a complex.
It also links back to the point again from Richard about the channel shift, which is, you know,
absolutely.
Yeah.
People, I mean, different generations have a different way of doing business, don't they? And they, you know, if you could report crimes by Twitter or social media, whatever it is, you're not picking up the phone and speaking to people. The issue with the challenge for us is we still need to be able to service whatever that is.
Yeah, particularly as go back to the point when something goes down. So if we wean people off it and channel shift, and then something happens with that channel, they're all going to come back and use the phone, aren't they? And if we've geared up to know they've all gone over here, we're going to be back here, aren't we, with different channels?
Yes, in terms of our flexibility and ability to service public. So they're the FCR current performance slides. So we've done those three. Sorry, go on.
No, not at all. You don't need to see the slide for this. When I know there's a relatively sort of clear path. When do we expect calls numbers to significantly increase again? I know it's summer, but do we have
June is last year the peak was in. We hit the peak last year. June saw the big difference in performance, but
weather makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And we've got Easter a little bit earlier this year.
Yeah.
The school holidays predominantly goes up. You've anti-social behaviour calls, etc. So next couple of weeks,
we'll have a test.
The challenge starts. The challenge just started in March anyway, just because of adverse weather. So if it gets nice, that's when we generally do.
Do we know what those figures were for March-ish?
We're still ongoing.
As in for March, as in the
it sounds like it's been.
I mean, it's been a challenging month.
Yeah, we get daily reports that come through around the speed of answer. So we know we've dropped a few 999 calls, for example, in March. Some of the times on certain days, particularly the weekend when the weather's been bad, have been outside what we would hope for. But there again, it's like anything else. But we haven't put the people in there yet.
No.
And I think we have to manage expectations that we're gearing up to be able to have those people and the building work connected to that by May, June time when we know the peak's going to go. So, you know, with a fair wind, we should be in a good position to manage the upsurge.
But if you look at the average for February of 7 seconds to answer a 3-9s call in comparison with where we were in the summer last year, it's a vast improvement, but it's now about sustainability, because there's a risk people go, it's all right now, you can take it all away. Actually, we need to sustain it, because we know that the channel shifting related work will also pose different challenges in terms of contact with the public. So next slide's about our mental health performance. Again, this is a fairly familiar slide that you've seen before in terms of numbers, percentages of occurrences with a mental health qualifier, which I know we've talked a lot about in terms of ensuring that we pick up those jobs because they're qualified at initial point of call, and sometimes it's not obvious at that initial point of call that there is a mental health element to that job until the officer goes, they've dealt with the longer term issues, and it's then ensuring that we go back and keep our housekeeping in order of ensuring that those logs reflect the fact that it was then a mental health related incident. So they're the facts and figures that we see and we've seen on the slides before. I think the next slide's probably more interesting in terms of the numbers that we don't normally see. So the breakdown of some of those statistics, and particularly, for example, when we talk about other agencies and capacity, capability, utilisation of police resources, is the police vehicle usage, for example, in terms of transport.
And it'd be interesting on the time spent. What 177 hours means on a, is how many police officers is that on a ship? You know, do you know what I mean? Making it real for people. 177 hours can be quite difficult to get your head around.
But it's interesting when you look at the average number of
It's 10
officers.
minutes time.
Average number of officers per job is 4.3.
Yeah.
Because of often the significant complexity of the environment in dealing with somebody and keeping them safe and keeping the public safe because of the nature of the incident. And again, the key to this will be the repeat incident. So I understand sometimes we are the service that gets called, but once we've introduced that person into the system, it's then, are we being called back to those incidents because they're not seeing the longer term problem solving and care that.
And I remember seeing some of the under 18 Section 136 detainees were repeated, probably for obvious reasons, but I've asked about that before and there were.
And if you speak to the officers, they'll tell you all we've done is move the problem from the custody facility to the Section 136 suite, and actually it's less efficient for us now, because if they went into custody, I already had a custody sergeant and a central detention officer to look after them. Now I'm actually taking a response cop off the ground for 8 hours per job.
At least one, yeah.
And that was my question. Is that 8 hours, 50 minutes per officer, or is it 8 hours, 50 minutes per job?
It's per job.
That's time per job.
But you will generally have at least 2 officers, because an officer can't stay with a valid individual with mental health issues on their own. So you generally got, so that's...
With disco lights in the room now.
Is this digital lighting?
That way I'm paid electricity.
So that's quite interesting data that we haven't seen before, that I think is quite revealing in terms of what our officers are spending time doing and how many are going to each incident and the outcomes particularly here.
Yeah.
In terms, so for example, those that we went to help that weren't open to services and returned to the community with no follow-up, they are invariably going to be repeat callers.
But this really helps when we're in negotiations with partners, because for the first time we're able to demonstrate and have evidence to show this is actually costing the service and the taxpayer money that it shouldn't, because these facilities should be being provided by other agencies.
We're losing them, if anything, aren't we?
So that's quite interesting data. This is district-based comparisons in terms of key crimes and whether they are up or down from this time last year in February. It speaks for itself really, unless there's any questions on it. Just gives you an indication of where some of the...
I've got some questions, but not for now. We can figure them out afterwards for the next round of updates.
Sexual offences, and then the breakdown of where they sit and in which area of the county. Again, probably for
Ditto, yeah.
deeper thought. Obviously, public safety, welfare, casualties from road traffic collisions, etc. Again, breakdown by county, which I think when you think about the old maps that had a consolidated figure of percentages on it, this is probably much more meaningful data in terms of what people are dealing with in each of the areas. But again, no doubt further.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to know the trend. So there's trend on that slide, not on the... Oh, I suppose that is ASB.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think it's difficult to know whether or not that's good, bad or indifferent.
Yes.
Yes.
Because often, the way that it's worked nationally is you'll get what's called I-quanta data, and it's per 1,000 population. And
Yeah.
it gives you a greater feel for, because I can tell you in some previous services I've been in, those kind of figures, they'd have been biting my right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, this is linked to the key areas.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And all happily pick up outside the meeting to sort of finesse.
And then what the Rural Task Force spend their time doing. And that's obviously just the explanation to the public of what all those acronyms mean in the document. So just think it's a work in progress. It probably gives a bit more of a flavour to the public of time-wise what are your officers and staff and policing service dealing with on a regular basis that no doubt we can discuss and it can be developed in those areas.
Great. It's interesting and helpful, and I think we can make it a little bit better probably, but it's a really good start. Thank you very much. So that deals with agenda item 6 and 7. 8 to 4 plan. There's only 2 things on the 4 plan at present. I don't know, did we send we've communicated the next...
Up until November.
Until November now. So that'll be published in due course. We've got crime data integrity next month, stalking harassment after that, and for the public who want to have an interest in those things, and we'll send out those published documents close to the time. Simon, any questions?
And just that one question that we had about the human rights and the use of
It was something like
body-worn camera.
It was something like, when will body-worn video have to be stopped because of human rights violations? Words to that effect.
I'd have to see the question, because actually the use of body-worn videos is actually to protect people's human rights at the same time.
I suspect it related to sort of data integrity type headlines.
How long before these cameras back?
Oh, body-worn video. It's been on the news this morning, hasn't it, about rollout of body-worn video in police forces.
But I think if that goes back to the point I was trying to make earlier about it isn't the cameras that are the risk to rights any more than vehicles are a risk to people's human rights. It's the way in which they're deployed, the policies, practices, procedures, the way in which they're used. And I know there is a tendency with repeat areas to skirt over it, but the operational feedback on Kirby Misperton begins. I'd encourage members of the public to read that first page, because that is a certification, if you like, from North Yorkshire Police about how they're going to police that very difficult situation in respect particularly of human rights and the other competing rights from everybody else. I mean, pre-pattern report in Northern Ireland, that kind of introduction, if you like, from an operational report would be almost unheard of. It is, and it's that attention to those things right at the beginning, before then all the data is presented, that I think provides the assurance that certainly the PCC will be able to take from that, because that's really important. It's not nothing.
And actually, I think it misses the point. It's not about technology, because the police service operates to an existing regime of laws that it has to obey and linked to the Human Rights Act. And the actual presence of the cameras has been shown to actually provide that level of security, both to the people being affected and the officers concerned, because the officers are entitled to their human rights as well.
I think when I read that question, I'm thinking like articulate right to a private life side of things. So one of the key things that we're doing with body-worn video and drones, because we'll be using drones moving forward, is the privacy impact assessment, and certainly for the use of drones, especially when you put in a drone up and it's seeing a lot of people going about the normal daily business. It's key that we get that right. So by May we will have those privacy impact assessments in place, and certainly around the body-worn video one, which will be accordingly published.
I agree. I think that's about privacy and data. We talked about that a lot today anyway, and the sort of the police's role in that, but the effort we put into making it secure. But do you want to come in?
I was going to say, I think the key thing from earlier is your point, Dave, about the fact that they're only going to be used when they're switched on. So technically, it shouldn't collect anybody else. It should only collect the people who are actually involved in the incident. There
and if somebody is in the background, then the software will redact those faces from any data that we keep and retain.
But if they are, I mean, it won't be a perfect world. No, there will be occasions where there is an arguable case that some things and activities have transgressed some of those protected areas that and the people represented here will want assurance that that's right, including the police themselves.
And I think people just need to remember that there's the regulations around the use of surveillance by the police that goes through statute. There is an independent commissioner that visits our service and every other service every year. And also, when you look at things like ANPR, we do privacy impact assessments, and that is all worked through our authorising officer, who provides that reassurance to me, and then from me to the surveillance commissioner around the way in which we use this data.
The last thing, I think your name's Dave, sort of on the back of Mike's point, the GDPR requires police forces and police and crime commissioners and every other person with these kinds of needs to put a statement on websites that cover all the use of data and what happens to them and where it's stored and what's done with it. So hopefully it will become very clear indeed how the police use their information, and it will be easily accessible on websites and things. So I hope that answers the question. And that's the last thing, isn't it, Simon? No other questions, nothing else. Is it? Any other business, anybody? No? Okay, thank you very much. See you this time next month. Talk about crime data integrity. Thank you.
Thank you.